The night of August 25, 1931, in the riverside town of Gaoyu, farmer Li Ming lay awake listening to rain hammer the thatched roof like impatient fists. The air hung heavy with the wet earth smell of swollen fields and the faint sickly sweetness of rotting grain. His wife, May, clutched their 5-year-old daughter's hand, her own fingers cold and trembling. They had tasted nothing but thin gruel for days, the metallic bite of floodwater already on their tongues from earlier leaks in the dikes. Li Ming's calloused palms still ached from hours spent packing mud and straw against the Huai River's rising growl. He whispered a quiet prayer to the old gods of the water, believing the ancient earthen walls would hold as they always had. But outside, the low thunder grew into something alive, something hungry. In that ordinary darkness, Li Ming could not know that his small world was about to be erased, that millions more would vanish with it into the mud and silence of a ghost country. This was never just a flood. In the summer of 1931, up to 4 million people vanished from the heart of China in one of history's deadliest man-made tragedies. The Yangtze Huai floods did not simply drown the land. They exposed the rotten core of a fractured republic where political chaos, corruption, and decades of neglect turned natural rivers into weapons against their own people. What looked like nature's wrath was the final brutal payment for systemic failure, greed, and hubris in a nation too broken to protect its own. To understand how China reached this breaking point, go back centuries. The land had always fought. Its rivers, ancient emperors built dikes and canals, legends praising Yu the Great for taming the floods. But after the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, the Republic of China splintered into warlords, civil war, and the fragile nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek. Funds meant for river control vanished into military pockets and bribes. Warlords fought each other while Japanese threats loomed. Deforestation stripped the highlands, sending silt choking the riverbeds higher than the surrounding plains. Local officials ignored repairs, peasants too, exhausted by taxes and conflict. To maintain the barriers, cultural fatalism, mixed with political paralysis, created the perfect storm. A country that once commanded the waters now stood helpless before them. The buildup was slow, then merciless. By June 1931, freak typhoons and weeks of relentless rain swelled the Yangtze and Huai beyond anything in living memory. Engineers sent urgent warnings. Dikes were cracking, water levels rising 2 feet a day. But in a land torn by fighting and poverty, the government diverted money and manpower to battles instead of repairs. Small villages patched leaks with whatever they could find: straw, sandbags, desperate hands. July brought more cyclones. Rivers burst their banks in places, yet officials downplayed the danger, promising the worst had passed. Cost-cutting and ignored pleas left the system primed to fail. By mid-August, the rain never stopped, the roar of water growing louder each night, tension coiling tighter in every home along the banks. Then came the core of the horror, granular and unrelenting. On the night of August 25th in Gaoyu, the dike simply exploded. A 20-foot wall of black water slammed through the town with a sound like the end of the world. Li Ming barely had time to shout before the surge smashed the door inward, knocking him off his feet. Icy water filled his mouth, tasting of mud and death. He lunged for his daughter, but the current ripped her away into the darkness. Screams tore through the night as neighbors were swept from their beds, bodies tumbling against floating debris like dolls. In Wuhan, streets had already become rivers for weeks. People clung to rooftops, watching their homes dissolve, the smell of sewage and corpses thick in the humid air. Short, brutal moments stacked one upon another, a mother clutching a wooden beam while her children slipped under, an old man clawing at a rooftop edge until his fingers bled, entire families drowning in silence as the flood claimed them in their sleep. The tragedy was granular, intimate, and merciless, each lost breath a tiny fracture in a country coming apart. In the chaos that followed, ordinary people rose with desperate courage. Boatmen paddled homemade rafts through the torrent, pulling strangers from rooftops at the risk of their own lives. Local soldiers, ordered into the flood rather than volunteering, waded chest-deep to drag survivors to higher ground. Foreign missionaries and Chinese relief workers set up makeshift camps, sharing what little rice and medicine remained. Yet bureaucratic realism tempered the heroism. Many acted under orders while higher officials delayed full mobilization, fearing it would expose the government's weakness. Some interventions even created new problems. Poorly planned evacuations sent crowds straight into deeper currents. Still, in those first terrible days, human will pushed back against the water, even as the system that should have prevented it all stood paralyzed. The immediate aftermath only deepened the cruelty. Evacuations dragged on for days in some districts, while officials argued over responsibility. Ordinary life staggered forward in unflooded cities, markets open, trains running, while refugees poured in with hollow eyes and stories no one wanted to hear. Disease raced through crowded camps, cholera, typhoid, dysentery, claiming as many as the flood itself. Bodies piled in the streets and rivers were shoveled into mass graves or left to float, treated as state statistics rather than mothers, fathers, children. Censorship and bureaucratic indifference kept the full horror from spreading quickly, breeding anger and a quiet, crushing sadness that settled over the land like fog. Long term, the numbers told a story of almost unimaginable scale. Official counts spoke of 145,000 drowned, but when famine and disease swept the survivors, the real toll climbed toward 4 million. Entire villages became ghost towns, fields ruined, economies shattered for years. Myths of heavenly punishment spread, yet the truth lay in human failure, a government too distracted by power struggles to maintain the ancient pact with its rivers. Political fallout rippled outward, weakening the nationalists and feeding the rise of communist forces who promised better order. The irony stung. Efforts to modernize had only repeated ancient mistakes through neglect and greed. Even now, the story matters. Modern China builds enormous dams and claims mastery over the same rivers, yet the same pressures, rapid growth, environmental strain, centralized decisions that sometimes overlook local warnings, echo the patterns of 1931. Climate change adds new fury to the waters. The lesson remains: when power forgets the human cost, when systems value control over care, entire populations can still vanish into the silence of a ghost country. And so, the rivers still flow through. Fields where 4 million once walked, laughed, and dreamed. What remains is not merely water and mud, but a haunting question whispered on the wind. How many more must disappear before we remember that every dike, every policy, every choice is built on the fragile backs of ordinary lives, and when those backs break, whole worlds vanish with them?